Okay, good morning. This meeting is being conducted pursuant to New York State Open Meetings Law, Public Officers Law, Sections 100, etc. For purposes of this meeting, I shall designate Jeff Tremblay as our recording secretary. Today we have before us consideration of revisions to several board rules. The first item for consideration is Board Rules Chapter 5 relating to legal defense trusts. Just very briefly, these proposed to clarify and assist with compliance with local law number 48 of 2019, which is now Chapter 11 of Title 3 of the Administrative Code. We discussed these at our open meeting on May 9th. They were then sent out for public comment and a public hearing. That public hearing was held on August 1. As I understand it, there were no written submissions and there was no public testimony at that public hearing. So we've got back as essentially what we had on May 9th with some minor changes really in the description, the statement of basis and purpose, in effect reflecting the change from the subjunctive to the present or the directive. And I don't think there are any other changes at all. Is that right, Chad?
There are no other changes
Okay.
other than the change of the statement of
Okay.
basis and purpose.
So are there any comments from the board or staff on the adoption of Board Rules Chapter 5? Hearing none, I call for a motion that the board adopt proposed rules Chapter 5. Any seconds?
Second.
All right, the motion for adoption of board rules, I guess we should vote then. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the motion for adoption of board rules Chapter 5 as presented as the final rule is passed. Okay. Next up is material dealing with enforcement procedures. Okay. Next up, we have proposed revisions to Board Rules Chapter 2 relating to enforcement procedures. We considered these at open meetings in February and March and June before they were submitted for public comment and public hearing which was held on July 25th. Again, these are, there are some, I think, some minor changes in these rules, but again, it doesn't seem there's anything significant. Catherine, just a quick review of those.
Sure. During the public hearing, we received testimony from reInvent Albany, but after consideration of that testimony, staff is not recommending any substantive changes. While the board may wish to consider some of reInvent Albany's recommendations in the future, a number of them are beyond the purview of the proposed rules or would require legislative action by council. The recommendations most relevant are either already addressed by the rules or would limit the board's discretion and require the board to articulate factors discussed during their confidential discussions. So staff's recommending the board just adopt the text of the rules and the statement of basis and purpose as it was published, only with the small changes to reflect that it is no longer a proposal and is in the present tense.
reInvent Albany was the only comment.
And reInvent Albany was the only comment.
And as you say, most of their comments dealt with, were beyond the scope of these rule changes, would require legal changes. Any further discussion or comments?
Just on one of their comments, I agree with you, most of them do not pertain to this, but they did suggest that where oath finds wrongdoing, that we publish those. And in the interest of transparency, why would we not?
So the board typically chooses to publish the report and recommendation from oath as part of the order. Staff's recommended leaving that within the discretion of the board. There may be times where the oath judge has decided to dismiss maybe some of the charges, in which case the board might want to choose not to have a public, not make public the ALJ's findings, which might include facts detrimental to that public servant. So it's really just leaving it within the discretion of the board. The board has typically chosen to make those report and recommendations public.
Is it fair to say that the vast majority of times where we actually have to make a decision, it's attached, or in some ways
Yes, almost all.
accompanies our report? My recollection is that I actually can't recall one where we didn't do that.
Right, no, I believe all of them have
Yeah.
been that
I
have
agree
found.
with keeping the discretion to.
Because I thought that was our general practice is to make it public, but we're retaining the discretion just in
Yes,
case.
just in case there's something in the report that the board would not want.
I mean, our decision is public, so,
Right,
which is the
right.
main thing, yeah. Any further comments?
I just, one comment on the data questions, that we spoke about this, comes up currently on the data. I agree that it's not part of this rulemaking, but I would like to put a pin in it, and I think we really should revisit it at a later meeting. Because I think they raised a lot of interesting points.
And then you want to say 2 sentences more about that, just?
No, well, they talk about the information that should be tracked and should be made public,
Mhm.
The types of complaints, the types of agencies, the types of violations.
Oh, okay, I hear what you're saying.
And I think some of that is in our report,
Mhm.
but maybe it's not as citizen-friendly as maybe
Mhm.
we could do it, and maybe we should revisit it at a later time.
Okay, yeah.
But
That
it's not
seem-
part of this rulemaking.
Right, that seems to be less to do with the enforcement procedure and more about the kind of data,
Exactly.
public information we should provide, which is definitely worth considering, but outside the scope of this,
Right.
okay.
And actually may not really need a rulemaking. I mean,
Right.
the board has quite
Exactly.
a bit of discretion about what it wants to share in
Mhm.
its annual report and its, and that sort of thing. So we can talk about what we want to include in that and change that without having to go through a rulemaking process to do that.
I just want to acknowledge that there
Mhm.
is some good points.
Okay, further comments? Ready to vote? Then I call for a motion that the board adopt proposed board rules, chapter 2.
So moved.
Second? Shall we vote? All in favor? Any opposed? The motion for adoption of board rules, chapter 2, is presented as the final rule, has passed. All right. Moving on. Third, we're now looking at proposed revisions to board rules 1-02 and 1-15 relating to community board members. As we have again discussed these and made revisions to these rules as we've gone along in open meetings in March and July, our action here would be to submit them for public discussion, right?
That's
Right.
correct.
So we're at a different stage than in the prior two.
That's correct.
There are some changes here from what we last saw, and maybe we can talk about those, but again, just to confirm my understanding of what we've been doing, is that these essentially codify 10 of our 18 previously issued advisory opinions, to put them all in one place where it's easier for the, both because we've gotten some message from the council, they like this, and also, and again, in the interest of transparency, making it easier for the public to understand what the rules are, to put them in the rules rather than requiring people to parse a bunch of advisory opinions.
That's exactly right. And the changes that are reflected in the materials before the board today are the revisions that were proposed by the Law Department and the Mayor's Office of Operations through their review and certification of this proposed rule. Mostly these are for clarity and precision, there are changes in both the commentary as well as the rule. Some of them, simply formal changes, changing may not to shall not, for instance, changing paragraph to subparagraph. Some, very technical fixes, and like I said, others are for clarity.
Okay, further discussion? All right, I think we're ready to vote. Do I have a motion to adopt proposed board rules, chapter 2, which would mean submitting them for public comment? At least it's not the final action, but for public comment.
That's exactly right.
Okay, do I have a motion? Have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Any opposed? Motion for adoption of board rules, chapter 2, as board rules 1-102 and 1-15 as presented as the final rule, has passed. There being no further business for the board's consideration at this open meeting, I hereby call it to a close.